So, a stark question for all of us, including the two guests we have with us. Is it a question about foregoing cheap flights now in order to save the planet in the future? Well, here's Keith Jowett from the Airport Operators Association and John Stewart, who's involved with the web campaign called Plain Stupid. We like the name of that. I'm going to go on to stuff off your website in a moment. Let's start with an email we've had from Mandy Armstrong. Now, Mandy says that the only people this will hurt, if there's extra tax on flights, is the lower class. The wealthy will still be able to afford 2 or 3 holidays a year. We've just moved to, her in-laws have just moved to Spain, and for the first time she's in a position to afford to go abroad each year, but the do-gooders, I think she means you, John.
She might well mean
the do-gooders want to deprive us of that. Signed, Angry and Poor. Now, that's it in a nutshell. You want to stop most of us from actually jetting off and enjoying ourselves.
I mean, actually, the figures show that for something like Mandy, she might have to fly a little bit less to see her in-laws in Spain. But most of the flying done on cheap flights is actually by richer people. And the real increase projected over the next 20, 30 years is by richer people flying weekends abroad. Poorer people, the really poor, don't fly at all because of the overall cost of the holiday. So Mandy's partly right, but also I think pretty wrong as well. So Mandy, you don't need to be quite as angry as you are right now.
Well, she's furious, and
I know she is.
I went to Tenerife earlier this year.
Right.
The plane was absolutely mobbed. As we were landing, about 7 other planes were still landing. As we were taking off, about 7 planes were taking off. We were herded in. Are you telling me that's most people? I mean,
the figures actually show that only about half the people in this country fly at all during the course of of the year, and the people who fly a lot are the wealthy people, and they're even using cheap flights. The average, I'll give just one figure, the average household income of a person using Stansted Airport, which is a low-income airport, is over £50,000 a year. Now, that does tend to suggest that the really poor people are not flying. It does mean that somebody like Mandy might have to fly instead of 3 times a year to see her in-laws, 2 times a year, but that, to be quite honest, given the environmental downsides of aviation, that is really not, I would suggest, an imposition.
Mandy, do email us back and see if you're convinced by that. You know, Keith, if you're here as the bad guy, because you're the one ruining the planet.
No, we agreed earlier I was the good guy outside.
You're actually both bad guys or both good guys, because depending on the viewpoint. You're the bad guy, Keith, because you're the one that wants to keep having the tax cuts and reductions for the airlines in order for the airlines to keep going. You're the one damaging the world, apparently.
Well, entirely untrue, and of course where I disagree is this story about tax cuts. It's a complete myth. I've got nothing against taxation per se. The country needs taxation for the good of us all. But actually, what I do have a problem is where we are inundated with lies and deceit from some of the lobbyists, not John here, of course, who talk about aviation receiving tax subsidies. The reality, Tim, is that the average rail passenger pays 8p halfpenny, 8.5p in tax for each journey he makes, and the smallest amount of tax the air passenger pays is £10, and it can be as much as £40.
John,
now that's the reality.
Sorry, Keith. Do you accept that in fact this whole industry is not subsidised?
We would say there certainly are tax breaks. There may be tax breaks to the rail industry as well, but there are tax breaks. There's no tax.
And should there be?
No, there are no tax on aviation fuel. Planes are 0 rated for VAT and so on. And I think we do need to remove the tax breaks if we can, working with our European partners to increase the...
working with our European partners.
Yeah, I know, I have to add that.
They're not going to do that, are they? In other words, the United Kingdom will unilaterally reduce its tax, put up the air flights, we can't fly.
No, we can't do that. But what is interesting is the European Parliament in July, I know they don't have the power of the Commission or the ministers, but the European Parliament in July did actually vote for these sort of fiscal measures, tax on fuel, tax on emissions. I think it's moving in that direction. It's going to take a while. Everything in Europe takes forever, but it's going to take a while, but I think it's moving in that direction. I think it's the only direction we can really move in environmentally.
Tim, let me give you another staggering fact, and that is the issue of subsidy, which John and others do claim aviation receives. The fact is that the average rail passenger The government gives hit.
Why don't we leave rail out of it?
All right.
It's the aeroplanes which are
Listen to
flying
this,
over our
Tim.
houses and dropping lots of
Takes
CO emissions on us.
halfpenny in tax from the average rail passenger with one hand, and with the other hand gives him back £4.30 in subsidy.
We're not talking about rail.
Aviation gets zero subsidy.
You
from
get
the
an
state.
awful lot of subsidies on the
Zero
fuel,
subsidy.
the VAT, and the whole kit and caboodle because the
As-
government knows
as
it wants
does
more air
all other-
travel to fuel UK PLC.
As does all other forms of public transport. What we propose is a system that will actually make a difference. Put aviation into emissions trading. We're enthusiastic for that. We know it will work. It will make a difference, and it will put the emissions back in the box, whereas taxation won't. You look at taxation in the motor car, and we know it hasn't worked. You look at taxation on aviation fuel. Aviation fuel has doubled in price over the last 18 months. Has it made any noticeable difference on our travel? I don't think so. Taxation won't do the trick.
This wonderfully named emissions trading may put some emissions back in the box, but really it's not going to be significant.
Of course it will, John. Why
So can I
not?
just intervene at that point and
Yes.
say that for those who don't follow it, emissions trading is
Yes.
when the UK has got a certain amount of emissions it has to suppress. Okay, we'll have amount of emissions with aeroplanes and we'll cut it elsewhere.
That's
and
right.
Trade
That's
it like
right.
that. Fine.
That's right.
Sorry, go on.
That's right. And it's really not going to be significant enough because aviation is the fastest growing contributor to climate change. Now, we can't have the sort of growth we've got right now and be serious about climate change. So what we're trying to say is really what we need to, and this may sound strange coming from Plain Stupid, but what we're actually saying, look at the business interests of the country. What aviation is in the interest of the business? It is the developing economies, trading with the developing economies of Asia, of China, of India. We can't have both those flights and cheap flights. And cheap short-haul flights. Let's go for the business flights first and by getting rid of the short-haul cheap
And
flights.
stopping the individual citizen of the country flying.
No,
just the businessman's allowed to fly.
No,
now.
no, I'm
just
not-
the rich and
no, I
wealthy,
didn't-
and you're going to stop
I didn't
the
quite-
modest means. You're
No,
going to stop
no, no.
Amanda flying.
No,
That is not socially just.
Well, what we're saying is that Amanda can fly, but Amanda really has to be aware that she's got to pay the real cost of flying. And that's the choice we're giving people. And that, I believe, is a real sensible choice in a world that's facing a climate change crisis.
In the air passenger duty she's paying, she's already paying
She's
double.
paying a little bit, Keith, a
she's
little bit.
paying double the cost of the carbon emissions that aviation creates.
Keith, how do you take on an argument? This is from Plain Stupid website about when you book your flights. Offer valid until it's too late to repair the damage you've done to the planet. Book now and leave others to pay. Our children who are going to have to clean up this mess. Offer subject to short-sighted profit chasing. I mean, you can't argue, can you, that the industry you are involved in is damaging the environment? Can you argue against that?
No, but we can argue that we can put back into the community, back into the environment, anything that we take out. Yes, every kind of industry, every kind of business takes something out of the environment, but we can pay to put it back through emissions trading.
One word answers. Is the era of cheap air travel going to be over soon?
It almost certainly is, yes. And for the sake of the planet, that has to happen. And for the sake of the economy.
That was 17. Keith, is it coming soon?
No, I suspect not, because we can find the solutions. Working together through emissions trading, we can find the solutions to this problem.
Well, on this cheerful subject, thank you both very much.
Thank you, Tim.
And assuming that global warming doesn't kill all our grandchildren, well, what will humans look like in 10,000 years? I've got some good news, and I've got some